All right. Hi everyone. A very good evening to all of you. I hope I am visible and audible. Thank you, Vishal. Thank you. Good evening. Hi, Shanavaz. I hope I'm visible and audible. Perfect. Perfect. So let's begin with today's session. Now, tell me, why are we doing this? Yes, you know the answer, but let's see if somebody has data. Hello, Tanuja. So, in the last 5 years, if I just talk about the last 5 years, 6 of your RC passages have been from this genre, economics and finance, right? So, let's have a look. So, these passages have been interdisciplinary in the sense that they have been combined with other topics also. For example, textiles. So, here we were looking at the textile world and some economic aspects of the textile sector, right? Then the political ideology of liberalism. Liberalism also has an economic side to it. If you have watched the political philosophy session, you know that, right? So these have been slightly, I would say, interdisciplinary in nature, all these topics that also talk about business and finance. There is a passage I remember that talked about the currency system in Tang dynasty, right? Similarly, in CAT 2020, there was a passage that discussed the US recession. So you do have financial aspects being discussed, you do have currency being discussed, you have economics being discussed when we talk about labor, right? So that is why this genre, business and finance and economics, that's what I want to say here, okay? So yeah. And whatever I tell you today, it is pretty comprehensive and it will help you in your WATs and PIs, right? So it's very relevant even after CAT, okay? All right then. So I will show you a table here. I hope it is visible completely. Just a second, in case I think the arrow is not completely visible, although that does not make a difference. Still, let me just okay, I think arrow itna hi hai. Right. So yeah, it is visible to you. Now I know that my picture is coming in the way, so let me just yeah, for a moment I have gone off screen, so you can look at the various economic theories here. And what I have done, I have also incorporated various financial crises, okay, and given them a timeline, right? So that has been the effort today. So we will discuss from pre 1930s, we'll begin in the 1900s, and we will end in the present, right? So quite a period of time we will cover today. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and I will come back here. So we begin with what I call classical economics. Now I'm sure that by now all of you know what the word classical really means. Yes? If you have done some philosophy sessions with me, then you do have an idea. Whenever I use the word classical, what am I referring to? Yes. Classical, it basically is the formative period, the first period in a way when something begins or when something emerges clearly. So we are talking about classical economics here, right? Do you remember Adam Smith? We again discussed him in our session on both philosophy and political philosophy. In both the sessions we talked about him. याद है किसी को? बताओ. The father of economics, he is called the father of economics, Western economics to be precise, right? So he was a contributor to this idea of classical economics. So let's see what all did these people along with Adam Smith say. Yes, absolutely, Amit Sayan, absolutely correct. So the key figures who gave this economic theory, they are named Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Jean Baptiste Say. Okay, so this has a weird pronunciation. Now, Say, Smith and Ricardo, These three people, so Ricardo primarily talked about international trade, Smith talked about how markets should be free, laissez-faire, that's the term that he gave. What's the meaning? You should remember this from the previous sessions. Laissez-faire economics. So Smith said that, government interference should be minimum in the economy. Let the markets operate themselves, okay? If you let private producers operate for profit and you leave everything to the forces of market demand and supply, eventually they will reach their own equilibrium, right? There will be stability in the market. The markets will decide the prices, they will decide the supply and the demand. Okay, so the government doesn't really have to interfere. So that is what laissez-faire economics is about. And they said that, yes, absolutely, minimal interference. So the idea is that, let's say, for a moment, there is a shortage of one particular good, right? Let's say mobile phones ki shortage ho gayi. Yeah? So there is a shortage, that means that there is demand in the economy, but the supply has gone down. So classical economics says, don't worry. What will happen is ultimately, if let's say this shortage persists, prices will go up and ultimately the demand will again match the reduced supply. When the prices go up, some consumers will say, oh, I can't afford this, let me not buy it. And now the new demand will come equal to supply, right? Similarly, so what happened here? The prices adjusted, the prices turned out to be flexible, they adjusted whenever there was a sort of a disequilibrium. Yes, so this was the core idea of classical economics, that markets will correct themselves. You don't worry a lot, okay? Whenever any sort of problem in the markets arise, they will manage. Wages, so in the labor market, let's say in the labor market there is a shortage of laborers. What will happen? Wages will rise, and once wages rise, again the same thing will happen, that the supply of labor will eventually become equal to the demand for labor, right? We will come to neoliberalism, TP. Good point you have raised. We will come to it, don't worry. So this is what classical economists said, and here was this guy Say, who primarily talked about supply. Okay, so Say said that supply creates its own demand. So the job of the producer is to keep producing. Even if, let's say, it results in overproduction, such an overproduction will be temporary. Such an increase in supply will be temporary. Because when the producer is increasing supply, the producer is also hiring more people to produce goods, also giving them wages. Now these wages mean that these laborers now have income. They will spend this income. When they spend this income, what will they spend it on? The goods that you are producing, right? So in the economy, even if in the economy there exists an overproduction of goods, eventually that overproduction will be balanced, because when you are overproducing, you're also hiring people to do it. You are giving them wages. They will have to spend those wages somewhere or the other, right? And what will they spend it on? They will spend it on your products. So this was Say's law of supply. Do you see any red flag here? Yes. There is a big red flag here, right? So actually, and that red flag manifested itself in the Great Depression. Okay, the Great Depression of the 1930s that originated in the US and then of course spread globally. Okay, so at this time we are talking about the 1900s. The belief was that prosperity depends on free competition, laissez-faire economics, and individual self-interest. Adam Smith said that it is not selfishness when every individual pursues their own self-interest, when they are worried about their profits. मुझे तो अपना प्रॉफिट से मतलब है, मैं अपने गुड्स प्रोड्यूस करूँगी, सेल करूँगी, प्रॉफिट कमाऊँगी. तो जब ये सब लोग सोच रहे हैं इकोनॉमी में, तो इकोनॉमी के लिए अच्छा है वो. इकोनॉमी में डिमांड क्रिएट होगी, इकोनॉमी में गुड्स ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस और सेल होंगे. सो दे सेड दैट दिस इज़ नॉट रियली अ बैड थिंग. इंडिविजुअल सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट, राइट? An individual desiring that they should own private property, they should produce goods for profit. डज इट रिंग अ बेल? किस चीज़ की बात कर रहे हैं हम? प्राइवेट ओनरशिप ऑफ गुड्स, प्रोड्यूसिंग गुड्स फॉर प्रॉफिट. यस. विच इकोनॉमिक फिलॉसफी डज दिस अलाइन विद? Capitalism. Yes. So Adam Smith was a capitalist. Adam Smith was an advocate of capitalism, right? And these people, the classical economists, they focused on the long run. They said short term में तो देखो market में disturbances होती ही रहती हैं, but long run में it will automatically come to an equilibrium. It will achieve stability in the long run. In the long run, it will self-correct. You don't have to go and intervene. इकोनॉमी में जो मार्केट फोर्सेस हैं वो अपने आप सेल्फ करेक्ट कर लेंगी. बट हुआ ऐसा? डिड दैट हैपन? इट डिड नॉट हैपन एंड वी हैड द ग्रेट डिप्रेशन. बट लेट मी टेल यू व्हाई एम आई टॉकिंग टू यू अबाउट इंडिविजुअल सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट. दिस इज अ CAT 2023 slot 1 passage excerpt and it talks about something called bourgeois individualism. Who used the term bourgeois? Bourgeois. What is the meaning of this term? Bourgeois, proletariat, remember? So bourgeois and proletariat, these were terms used by Karl Marx, and Karl Marx said bourgeois is the owner class, the owner of this property, owner of factories, right? And proletariat is the worker class, the laborers that this employer employs, the owner employs. So bourgeois individualism is a term that criticizes this laissez-faire economics. It criticizes this idea of classical economics that everybody should pursue their own self-interest, because this self-interest is actually the interest of rich people who own factories. It is not the self-interest of the workers, right? So this is called bourgeois individualism. Who is pursuing this individualism? The owner, right? So now if you know the meaning of bourgeois individualism already, if you are aware of the ideas of capitalism, it becomes easy to comprehend this, right? And why am I doing classical economics, Keynesian economics with you? Because sometimes your passages mention Keynesian economics. Sometimes they mention the name of Keynes. So you should know from where that idea comes. For that we need to know classical economics as well. ठीक है, तो इसलिए कर रहे हैं हम. The Communist Manifesto, absolutely, absolutely right. So the Great Depression is what classical economics led us to. Okay, now what happened? Yes, during the Great Depression, exactly क्या हुआ था? Why did it happen exactly? See, classical economists said markets will correct themselves. The producer should keep on producing. This is also called supply side economics. Because ये बोल रहे हैं अरे प्रोड्यूसर प्रोड्यूस करते जाओ, सप्लाई विल क्रिएट इट्स ओन डिमांड. सो कंपनीज kept on doing this, and the belief in the market was that supply will eventually create a demand. So these companies that are producing goods, they will find buyers, they will earn profits. That was the belief in the market, even in the stock markets. So what did investors do? They kept on buying the shares of these companies in the hope that they will earn profits in the future. और ऐसा जब इन्वेस्टर्स करते जाते हैं तो क्या हो जाता है मार्केट में? देयर इज स्पेक्यूलेशन एंड इवेंचुअली अ प्राइस बबल फॉर्म्स, जहाँ पे प्राइसेस बहुत ज़्यादा अनसस्टेनेबल लेवल्स में राइज कर जाते हैं, राइट? सो इवेंचुअली the stock market crashed. Some people realized that, dude, this company is not making profit. I have kept on investing in this. Profit तो आ ही नहीं रहा, नज़र ही नहीं आ रहा, right? So in 1929, some individuals realized this. There was a mass selling of shares, and because of this massive stock market crash, a Great Depression was triggered, right? So this actually exposed the weak foundations. These companies had very weak foundations, right? They had a glut of products. Glut means उनके वेयर हाउसेज में प्रोडक्ट्स पड़े थे, कोई बायर ही नहीं था. ओके, सो मार्केट्स did not correct themselves. There was a then unprecedented employment. अब जब इतने सारे already produced products हैं जो बिक नहीं रहे हैं, they're not selling, would you produce more? And if you're not producing more, would you need people? Would you need employees, workers? You would not. So what it resulted in? Unemployment. And क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिस्ट है ठीक है, शॉर्ट टर्म में हो जाती है अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट. इफ देर इज एन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट दैट मीन्स देर इज एन एक्सेस सप्लाई ऑफ लेबरर्स, सो देर इज मोर सप्लाई, डिमांड इज लेस. अल्टीमेटली क्या होगा, उनके वेजेस डिक्रीज हो जाएंगे क्योंकि बहुत ज़्यादा सप्लाई है. वेजेस डिक्रीज होने के बाद अपने आप सप्लाई और डिमांड इक्विलिब्रियम में आ जाएगी. बट डिड दैट हैपन? नो. Even after a decrease in wages, unemployment still persisted. First, wages did not decrease so easily. Yes, there would be a backlash. Wages did not decrease so easily. And even after a decrease in this, there was still unemployment. Okay, because again, वो products बिक ही नहीं रहे थे. So even at reduced wages, the companies were not willing to employ more people. So it was a very bad time actually for the US economy. The Great Depression persisted for a whole decade. Okay, and the government did everything that they could. It happens now that when you're suffering from a prolonged illness, you try anything that anyone tells you. Yes, so you're ready to do anything. So that happened during the Great Depression. Okay, so now government increased taxes, hoping that this increase in taxes will result in more government revenue. गवर्नमेंट के पास ज़्यादा पैसा होगा तो वो ज़्यादा स्पेंड करेगी and it will therefore boost demand in the economy. It even increased interest rates and tariffs. ये क्यों करेंगे? Why did they do this? Increase in the interest rates. Yes. Shouldn't they reduce interest rates at this time? They want to boost demand in the economy ना. तो इंटरेस्ट रेट्स रिड्यूस करेंगे तो लोग इजीली बोरो कर पाएंगे. सो व्हाई इज दिस हैपनिंग? बिकॉज दे वर फॉलोइंग द ओल्ड इकोनॉमिक्स रूल्स. सो ओल्ड इकोनॉमिक्स रूल्स, इकोनॉमिक्स के रूल्स ये बोलते थे, दे यूज्ड टू से दैट you have to maintain your credibility as a government in this time. So you have to be a credible government. You have to portray to the outsiders that we can offer you high interest rates, please invest in our economy. You have to maintain that faith of your international debtors. So increase these interest rates. That was the old economics suggestion. Similarly, prioritize your country at this time. Okay, prioritize your domestic production. Tariffs increase kar do imports pe. What is happening today as well, right? I'm sure you're no stranger to the word tariffs. So increase tariffs on various products, and that way you will save your domestic economy. They did that. They cut fiscal spending. Now again, why would they do this? They decreased government spending while they increased taxes. Now they didn't use these increased taxes to increase government spending, which is what should have happened. No, this is called austerity measures. When there is an increase in taxes and decrease in spending, these are called austerity measures. तो पहले की जो क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिक्स थी ना, वो ये बोलती थी कि इस टाइम पर ऑस्टेरिटी प्रैक्टिस करो. गवर्नमेंट शुड रिड्यूस इट्स स्पेंडिंग रादर दैन इंक्रीजिंग इट, बिकॉज इट इज़ इम्पॉर्टेंट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट टू नॉट बी इन अ लॉट ऑफ डेफिसिट. अगर गवर्नमेंट इस टाइम पर बहुत ज़्यादा डेफिसिट में चली गई, मतलब कि उसके ऊपर बहुत सारा उधार आ गया, सो देन इट्स क्रेडिबिलिटी विल वर्सन. इट विल नॉट बी सीन एज अ क्रेडिबल कंट्री. सो दिस इज वॉट वॉज प्रीच्ड earlier, austerity measures, tariffs, these are called protectionist policies. These tariffs, they worsened the crisis. Okay, so they worsened the crisis. Now what happened? Because of an increase in interest rates, borrowing तो बहुत difficult हो गई, और वैसे भी जो companies थी, their products were not selling. They were anyway not able to repay the loans that they had taken. And people's faith in the economy shook big time. Yeah, so they wanted their deposits back. तो मैं चली गई बैंक, मैंने बैंक से कहा मेरे डिपॉजिट्स वापस दो, मेरी एफडी तोड़ दो, मुझे नहीं करना आपके साथ डिपॉजिट, राइट. I don't trust the banks because these banks have given loans to these companies that are not producing anything now. They are not earning profit. But banks के पास एकदम से इतना पैसा था ही नहीं because the borrowers were not paying back. So what happened? Banks failed. This is called a bank run. Banks failed. Okay, and the unemployment persisted for a decade. At its peak, there was 25% unemployment in the US. Imagine. 25% is a lot, okay, for an economy. So this was called the Great Depression, and rightly so, yeah. So ये depression वैसे psychology से नहीं आया है, it refers to economic cycles. So in economic cycles the peak is called boom, okay, so there's boom, there is bust, and this trough is called depression, okay, right. So the Great Depression, I hope this is clear to you now. And this was perhaps me during the 1930s when everyone is complaining about the Great Depression, but you were already poor. This happens, right? So if those of you who have seen, let's say so all of us have seen the Great Recession caused by COVID. So I think it impacted the middle class not as much as it impacted the rich, because for the rich they suffered a lot of decrease in their wealth. They were heavily invested in the stock markets. For somebody like me, I was not invested in the stock markets as such, right? So but yes, those people also made a lot of gains if they stayed invested. So yeah, both sides. Okay, all right. Yes, tariff से तो और problems आएंगे because international trade was virtually stifled. You are right, chilled इंसान. ठीक है. So tariff increase होगा तो आप international trade को curb कर रहे हो, and इस time पर economy को ज़रूरत है trade की, right? So you're right in saying that the problem increased. Okay, so then emerged John Maynard Keynes, the knight in the shining armor. Keynes wrote a book in 1936 that gave an economic theory, okay, which emerged as the dominant popular theory after the Great Depression. Keynes ने कहा कि देखो ये नहीं work करता है. This idea that the markets correct themselves, this does not work. Okay, and actually this idea that supply will create its own demand is flawed. It is demand that creates its own supply, not that supply creates its own demand. So say was wrong. Okay, say was wrong. So John Maynard Keynes said that please don't leave market to themselves. Okay, so you have, as the government, you have to intervene in the economy. You have to boost demand at this time as the government. Okay, fiscal policy means government की policy in terms of the spending that it is doing, the taxes that it is collecting. So fiscal policy at this time must manage demand, it must boost demand, and this demand will drive the economy. तो हम supply side economics से कहाँ पर आ गए, demand side economics पर, right? So the key insight at this time was that wages and prices उतने flexible नहीं होते हैं जितना हम सोच रहे हैं. They are not as flexible as we thought them to be, right? So this was the key insight, that therefore there is a need for government intervention, because it's not like prices are so flexible that they will rise and fall flawlessly and the markets will adjust themselves. That does not happen. Okay, so now the classical economists focused on the long run, right? So now the Keynesian economists, Excel Gamer, we have a specific session for this called Heart to Heart with Mentors. You can ask such queries there. This breaks the flow of the session if I start talking about it in the middle of this particular session. Okay. So classical economists, they focused on the long run. Long run की बात करते थे, long run पे focus करते थे, long run में सब चंगा सी, right? Now here came Keynesian economics, and Keynes said in the long run we are all dead. अरे long run का किसको पता है? correct the short term, right? So this is a very famous retort by Keynes, very popular. Now, earlier we were following this very classical liberalism approach. See, politics and economics is very related. You must be thinking आप ये सब क्यों पढ़ रहे हो, क्या ज़रूरत पड़ गई आपकी लाइफ में. But actually if you see, economics and politics very related philosophies. So classical liberalism follow होता था classical economics के time पर, which said that government interference should be minimum. But now that it was realized that no, the government needs to intervene for the welfare of the people, for maintaining, equality in the economy, for boosting the economy. So now we became modern liberals. So this was modern liberalism, which said not minimum government but limited government. Minimum government interference से हम limited government interference पर आ गए. And उसका consequence क्या होगा? What do you think will be the consequence? ब्यूरोक्रेटिज्म. जब गवर्नमेंट का रोल इंक्रीज होता है, दैट मीन्स गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट्स रोल इंक्रीजेज, न्यू एजेंसीज आर क्रिएटेड, न्यू रेगुलेशंस आर क्रिएटेड. सो दिस इज कॉल्ड द राइज ऑफ ब्यूरोक्रेटिज्म, right? This idea of government departments doing various functions. Now why am I telling you this? Because this is a word that has appeared in one of your CAT RC passages, the rise of bureaucratism, right? So Keynes के time पर this happened. Okay, so now what do you think? This works, this demand side economy works, and probably there won't be any other problem in the world economy. If only that were the case. If only we lived happily ever after, right? Economics is a social science. It is not a philosophy. I would say it is basically it applies philosophies. Okay, so for instance, classical economists, they were primarily those old capitalists like Adam Smith, right? Keynesian economists were also capitalists, but they embraced this part of socialism that we need limited government, right? Okay, yes, bureaucratism is basically when there are a lot of bureaus or departments in your government doing different jobs, right? For instance, we have Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education, Ministry of External Affairs. These are what? These are essentially government departments. So these bureaus, they need bureaucrats also. So this is bureaucratism, basically a government where these bureaucrats make important decisions, right? And there is an increased role and influence of these bureaus and bureaucrats. Okay? Bureaucracy, absolutely. Okay. So, however, even Keynesian economics was to fail. Okay, so when did Keynesian logic break? Kab hua aisa? Can anybody tell me? When did the Keynesian logic fail? Have you heard of this word stagflation? Stagflation. So, stagflation is a combination of stagnation and inflation. It's called a portmanteau. Such combinations of two words, like brunch is a portmanteau of breakfast and lunch. Similarly, stagflation is a portmanteau of stagnation and inflation. Okay. So now Keynes said that, you know what? Unemployment and inflation have an inverse relationship. Okay, they don't go hand in hand, they have an inverse relationship, meaning if one increases, the other will decrease. Okay, so if let's say you boost demand in the economy, आपने boost कैसे करी demand? आप as government you started spending money, you perhaps lowered interest rates, so people also borrowed and start spending money. So what will happen as a result? As a result, it may happen that people want to buy a lot of goods. Yes, there is a lot of money in the economy now. However, the supply of goods is not able to keep up, so the prices of goods rise. So inflation rises. but at the same time, because you have boosted demand, now these companies, they will hire people to produce those goods for you because you are demanding those products. So unemployment will fall. So inflation may rise as a result of this spending, but unemployment will fall, and vice versa. ठीक है, वाइस वर्सा भी वर्क करेगा. जब इन्फ्लेशन फॉल करेगी तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट राइज होगी. ये किसने बोला था? कीन्स ने, राइट. सो कीन्स का ये लॉजिक था. बट इमेजिन अ सिचुएशन 1970s में, स्पेसिफिकली इन द यूएस, अ सिचुएशन अरोज जब there is high inflation and at the same time it's not like unemployment is coming down, there is at the same time high unemployment. So now how do you boost demand in such a case as the government? If you were the PM, okay, at that time, if you were the president, sorry, at that time, how would you boost demand? Because you can't increase spending. The moment you increase spending, inflation will rise. Right. Now, inflation is already high. You can't afford that. So, how do you reduce unemployment now? So, it was a catch-22 situation. It was a tough time. Right. Why did this happen though? This stagnant demand. So, there was no growth in the economy. There was high inflation and there was high unemployment. All three negative things. Yes. The reason was, now you'll be surprised, it's actually an Israel-Palestine issue. Okay, oil embargoes in 1973 on the US. So see how politics and economics, they are cousins, right? They are very closely intertwined. Okay, so what happened was that this Israel-Palestine conflict is a 1948 का conflict. इतना पुराना conflict है ये, right? So in 1970s, I think 71, a war happened. Was it 67 or 71? So there a war happened. Okay, it was called the Yom Kippur War. Now basically various Arab nations, they support Palestine because they feel that Jerusalem is a holy Muslim site, a holy Islamic site. So they support Palestine. Now therefore they are of course against Israel's policies. So a war happened between Israel and these Arab nations. Now what US did at that time, it supported Israel, and Soviet Union, it supported the Arab nations. So because US supported Israel, these Arab nations, they control oil. They have a lot of oil. They put an embargo. They imposed an embargo, a ban. Okay. So there was an oil ban. They stopped exporting oil to the US in 1973 and this created a supply shock. Supply shock matlab oil ka supply ekdam se decrease ho gaya. Now oil is something that is used in transport, in the production of so many goods. So when that happens, what will happen? You will not be able to supply those goods, right? The supply of those goods will go down. Moreover, producing those goods will become more expensive at the same time. So prices will go up, right? So because prices are going up, people will stop demanding those products. Why should I buy it at a high price? And now because people are not demanding products, why would you hire people to produce those products? So you'll start firing your employees. लोग खरीद ही नहीं रहे आपके products. So do you see how one thing leads to another? So there was stagnant demand, there was high inflation, and at the same time there was high unemployment. Okay, and all because of the conflict, the Arab-Israel conflict. Interesting, is it? Tell me. So how did we come out of this stagflation? Again, it persisted for a whole decade. The US specifically came out of this stagflation only in 1983, to be very specific, if I have to put an exact year. So this was the rise of another theory. So we first had the classical economics, then we had Keynesian economics. अब वो भी fail हो गई. तो अब आया एक theory called monetarism. See, we are following a timeline here. सो इफ आई शो इट टू यू अगेन, 1930s to 60s कीन्स की फिलोसफी बढ़िया काम करी, राइट, बट इट ब्रोक डाउन इन 1970s. सो देन दिस वॉज द राइज ऑफ मॉनेटरिस्ट एरा. ठीक है, मॉनेटरिस्ट एरा. सो मॉनेटरिस्ट ने क्या बोला कि देखो ये ना गवर्नमेंट से नहीं हैंडल होगा, द फिस्कल साइड कैन नॉट रियली हैंडल दिस सिचुएशन. who can handle this situation? The central bank. We have RBI, they have Federal Reserve. Okay, their central bank, the US. So they said that only the Federal Reserve can handle this situation. How? Through interest rates. So they said that the solution lies in monetary policy. इसको क्या बोलेंगे? Monetary policy. Fiscal policy ये वाली है जो कीन्स ने कहा था कि गवर्नमेंट मस्ट एक्ट. So solution monetary policy में है. Federal Reserve, tell Federal Reserve. Yes, absolutely. Petrodollars, TP, absolutely right. So now they said that the central bank should increase interest rates drastically. एकदम से interest rates increase कर दो. What will happen when that happens? The interest rates have increased drastically now. People won't buy. Okay, protest. All right. So people won't buy goods, right? And when people stop demanding goods, the prices of goods will come down. So you will be able to rein in this high inflation. High inflation is bad for the economy. Some amount of inflation is good, but very high inflation is bad. So they said कि ये देखो ये bitter pill तो लेनी ही पड़ेगी. This is a bitter medicine, but you will have to swallow it. Okay, if you want to decrease this inflation, please raise interest rates drastically. Once inflation is reduced, what will happen? Once prices come back to their normal levels, okay, things will stabilize. Okay, prices will be reduced, suppliers will be interested. Now it won't be so expensive for the suppliers also, it won't be so expensive for the consumer also. So eventually we'll be able to handle the situation. Abhi ke liye increase the interest rates. You will face short term recessions because of course people will stop demanding, people will stop consuming, right? When the interest rates are so high, because what will happen? Interest rates being high mean that you can't borrow money easily. When you can't borrow money easily, you can't take a home loan, you can't take a car loan. So you will stop consuming, you will consume less basically. Consume here does not mean khana, right? It means, consuming these goods, like a car then becomes something that you're consuming, right? So short-term recessions आए specifically 1981 में, 1982, 1983 में, but eventually this cycle broke, this vicious cycle of stagflation, right? Does that make sense? What I'm saying, stagflation. And what is the relevance of this picture? This is an actual picture, it's not a meme. So it's from the 1970s. Petrol had become very expensive, right? So people ditched automobiles. They started commuting on horses, right? It's an actual picture. So now this was the era of monetarism. Yes, this was the era of monetarism, right? So at this time, it was felt that देखो हमने इतने साल, we said that government intervention is necessary. We said that we need institutions so that government can intervene to, bring us out of recessions. But did that work here? It didn't work. The government was helpless. Government couldn't take us out of this crisis. Eventually, it's the Federal Reserve that took us out. So people became a little anti-government regulation. They felt that the government is just regulating us. There is so much bureaucratism, and ultimately it's not even having the effect that we wanted. We gave government these powers so that it can rescue us at the times of crisis, but that didn't happen. So people became slightly anti-government after this, and there was a lot of deregulation that started happening in economies. Deregulation का क्या meaning होता है? Hmm. So deregulation is when uh, government interference in any economy is less and laws become more and more relaxed. Okay, instead of becoming strict. Regulation is when government makes its laws stricter. Okay, deregulation is when those laws, those rules are relaxed. So this was that era. Right. So the prevalent ideology from 1970s to 2008 क्या होगी उस टाइम पर? At that point, now we come to neoliberalism. Somebody asked this? Yes. We now started following neoclassical economics. See, in philosophy, in political philosophy, you must have seen this, no? एक philosophy popular होती है, then for some time it goes out of fashion, then after some time it comes back in fashion in a new avatar, in a new form, right? So this is happening everywhere, even in economics. So at this point we were neoclassical, okay, in terms of economics, meaning that we realized that, see, earlier we said that supply side economics to bekar hai, you know, it's the demand side economics that we should focus on. But stagflation showed us that actually supply side matters. It's not useless, right? Because it was a supply shock. The oil shock was a supply shock. The supply of oil reduced overnight, right? That resulted in a reduction in supply of various products. You can't handle a supply shock through demand side. Oh, let's boost spending, चीज़ें ठीक हो जाएंगी. चीज़ें कैसे ठीक होएंगी जब सप्लाई ही नहीं है, सप्लाई डिसरप्शन है. So it was realized that supply is also important. It's not as useless as it was thought to be during the time of Keynes. So neoclassical economics, that's what we followed. And in terms of politics, we were neoliberal. What is neoliberalism? Do you remember? We talked about it. So neoliberalism, see, the liberalism that was followed during the time of Keynes, that was more socialist liberalism, है ना? Socialist मतलब जिसमें हम government का role recognize करते हैं in welfare of the people. Neoliberalism is more on the right side of the political spectrum, specifically economically. Economically, neoliberalism says, again, laissez-faire economics, minimum government interference. So ultimately, हम वापस आ गए, right, in a new avatar in this period, 1970s to 2008. So what will happen? This bourgeois individualism researched private ownership of property, individuals producing and operating for profit, free markets, anti-government sentiment. However, two very interesting developments happened, right? Because it was a modern economy. दो बहुत interesting चीज़ें हुई. There was a democratization of credit. What does this mean? Such big words, democratization. क्या मीनिंग है इसका? So basically, it became easier and easier for the average middle class also to obtain loans. Okay, so earlier, you know, when you had to take a loan, there were a lot of formalities, a lot of limitations, you know, strict rules that were in place, such that certain people, especially let's say the lower middle class or the lower class, they were not able to obtain loans. And these, you know, these norms, these rules, they were in place in order to ensure that only those people take loans who can repay. So unless you don't have a good credit history, you were not able to take loans. But at this point it was felt, अरे बहुत गवर्नमेंट कंट्रोल है लोन्स पर भी, इतने सारे रूल्स बना रखे हैं गवर्नमेंट ने, सो लेट्स रिलैक्स दीज रूल्स. Ordinary people should also be able to get loans. So there was a democratization of credit. Credit here means loans, right? So what happened? As a result, consumerism increased. What is consumerism? Materialism, consumerism, when we consume a lot, right? For example, the average American household or the average Indian household also today, we have a lot more products in our home, a lot more furniture than, let's say, what our ancestors had. So this is a result of consumerism. We are consuming more. So consumerism increased and all of this was fueled by debt. So लोग लोन पर चीज़ें खरीदने लगे. Like people buying an iPhone on credit. I never understand it. Sorry to say if I'm being judgmental, but मुझे नहीं समझ में आता कि हम लोन पर एक फ़ोन क्यों लेते हैं, right? So something that's not even essential. So consumerism increased and this was all fueled by debt. Everything on EMIs. And this is very important because I'm coming to a point here. There was a financialization of the economy. इसका क्या मतलब होता है financialization of the economy? So look at the Indian scenario today. A few years back, did a lot of individual investors, did a lot of people around you invest in the stock markets, directly invest in shares? Let's say when you were a kid, did a lot of people around you invested in stock markets directly? Maybe they bought mutual funds, but people didn't directly invest in stock markets because they were not very accessible, they were not very transparent, right? Financialization of the economy means when the financial market, stock market, when the financial institutions like banks, they gain a very increasing influence in your life, an increasing role in your life. Okay, so there happened a financialization of the US economy specifically during this period. And shares to chalo simple products hai, right? Shares, stocks, we understand them. More and more such complex products, complex assets, I should call them assets, financial instruments. जैसे shares हैं मेरे को पता है क्या है, mutual funds हैं I know what they are, but more and more complex financial instruments came into being. A case in point, yes. So for example, today it's crypto. Today for us it is crypto. At that point it was derivatives. Find out what derivatives are. It's a very easy concept if you want to grasp it broadly. अभी मैं समझा भी दूंगी, ठीक है? So बहुत ज़्यादा complex products आ गए. A lot of times the investor didn't even understand them well, but they just bought them. ठीक है, नई investment product है, high returns देगी, right? So this happened. So eventually what will happen? In the early 2000s itself, we saw the consequences. US recession तो बाद में आया. उससे पहले क्या हुआ था? Have you heard of this? The dot-com bubble burst. Yes, futures and options, correct. The dot-com bubble burst. Have you heard of this? So internet was the new big thing at that time, right? Telecom, internet infrastructure. So the laws related to telecom, investment in internet companies, they were relaxed. ठीक है, उसमें deregulation हो गई, rules को relax कर दिया. Similarly, banking rules को भी relax करा, so that investment banks could now finance or could now undertake IPOs for risky companies. What are IPOs? Let's say I have a company, or let's take the example of Rodha. So Rodha is currently not traded, Rodha shares are not traded on the stock market, right? So tomorrow if Ravi sir decides I want to trade my company on the stock market, so he will go for an IPO, initial public offer. So now investment banks earlier, they were the banks who used to handle this IPO. They would publicize this IPO to other people, right? They would also invest some money in it. And therefore investment banks की बहुत बड़ी responsibility होती है कि वो अच्छी companies को ही choose करें, right? Because काफ़ी सारे लोग पैसा लगाएंगे फिर उसमें. But because of some deregulations, there was something called a Glass-Steagall Act. मैं ज़्यादा technical नहीं होना चाहती, right? इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स को अलाउ कर दिया रिस्की कंपनीज के IPOs को भी मार्केट करने के लिए, उसमें इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए, राइट? एंड एज अ रिजल्ट नाउ सो मेनी कंपनीज, इंटरनेट कंपनीज, दे लॉन्च्ड देयर IPOs, राइट? वो आ गई स्टॉक मार्केट पे रजिस्टर होने. People invested in them. There was a point when people didn't even see what the underlying company was. As long as it had a .com after its name, they invested in it. Okay. So a bubble was created in the economy. These companies had never earned profits, mind you. They were just, they just existed. They had never earned profits and still people were investing in them. So Robert Shiller, an economist, predicted that this is a bubble that is about to be pricked. It will be burst. He said that currently there is an irrational exuberance in the market, irrational enthusiasm, and this is bound to burst. And this guy predicted it. He wrote a book called Irrational Exuberance. The month in which his book was published, that very month, the bubble burst. Right, so it was a very timely book. Okay, yes, to list the company on the stock market. Absolutely, Abhijit, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So everybody is just looking at the premium. It's GMP's gross market premium, if I'm not wrong, right? So everybody is just investing in the IPOs by looking at it. Nobody really knows what the company does, right? So ये था .com bubble burst, and currently do you feel that something similar is happening with AI as well? So those people who were around the .com bubble explosion, they were around there. They existed at that time. They are looking at all the AI startups and thinking, अरे ये तो पहले भी हो चुका है. This has happened before. Deja vu. Okay. So Fed substantially decreased interest rates. Fed is the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the US. It decreased interest rates. अब bubble burst हुआ तो recession आ सकता है ना economy में, right? A recession, in fact, it created recessionary conditions. So Fed decreased interest rates कि अरे चलो let's decrease interest rates. Let people consume more. Let's boost spending, both by people, by government, by everybody. स्पेंड करेंगे, मार्केट में डिमांड बूस्ट होगी, एंड वील कम आउट ऑफ दिस रिसेशन. विल नॉट फेस प्रोलॉन्ग्ड रिसेशनरी कंडीशंस, राइट? सो डू यू थिंक, व्हाई हैव आई हाईलाइटेड दिस? Why have I highlighted this? That as a solution, this is what the Federal Reserve did. So why do you think I have highlighted this for you? It will have an impact. When will it have an impact? Just 7-8 years later. And now we come to the US recession of 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis. Who will explain this to me? What does this subprime mortgage mean? Why is it called this crisis? Anyone who has seen any documentary, any movie on this? Tell me. Real estate mortgage. Mortgage is to basically buy when you actually buy a home, right? But you basically take a loan. Okay, you take a home loan, and then against that, using that, you buy a home. That is a mortgage, right? So too big to fail. Okay, you've seen too big to fail. Okay, all right. So remember that during the Lehman Brothers crisis, during the .com bubble burst, interest rates were reduced. So now taking loans was cheap, interest rates were very low. Moreover, now see, this was very systematic. Okay, I think calling it a crisis is actually a wrong term. It was a crime. Right? Because it was very systematic. First, there was a deregulation of mortgage lending. Okay, so now these people, earlier again, loans were given to people who could repay them, but again rules were relaxed. So now who was borrowing? These are called subprime borrowers. Prime borrowers, वो borrowers जो repay कर सकते हैं, उनका credit record बहुत अच्छा है. Subprime borrowers जिनका credit record उतना अच्छा नहीं है, but still we are giving them loans. So rules were relaxed so that you could give loans to such people, risky loans. Then what happened was that you didn't just stop there. If let's say they had stopped there, so maybe a few banks would have failed. What they did was they created financial products out of this. Financial instruments, products out of this. अब ये कैसे हुआ? Let me just quickly tell you. See, let's say I am a bank, right? You are A, you take a loan from my bank, right? Now you have to pay an EMI. Okay, now initially I give you this loan at a very cheap rate. Let's say for the first 2 years, it's called a teaser rate. Okay, for the first 2 years you have to pay me just 0.5% interest rate, and even the principal repayment is also very low. Maybe principal to repay karna hi nahi first 2 years. It's only after the reset, after first 2 years there will be a reset, आपका interest rate भी increase होगा, and then you'll have to repay the principal also to me. So initially it's a very cheap loan for you. You will buy it and you will promise me that okay, after 2-3 years I will give you this EMI with interest rate. So you extend money to many such shady borrowers, for the lack of a better term, who may not repay. Now you club all their loans. And let's say you have customers also. बैंक के पास customers भी होते हैं जो बैंक में money deposit करने आते हैं. So when customers come to you, what you say that what, we have these loans and these people will repay us, right? So instead of repaying us, why don't we have created a financial product out of it. हमने एक तरह से ABCDE के लोन्स को कंबाइन करके, लेट्स से 500 के लोन्स थे, एक 2500 रुपीज़ का इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोडक्ट बना दिया, राइट? सो यू बाय दिस एंड दे विल पे दिस इंटरेस्ट टू यू. ओके, यू बाय दिस राइट नाउ, दे विल पे द इंटरेस्ट प्लस द प्रिंसिपल टू यू, नॉट टू अस. हमें नहीं देंगे वो, अब आपको दे देंगे, ठीक है? और बहुत अच्छा इंटरेस्ट रेट है, देखो, राइट? बहुत अच्छा इंटरेस्ट रेट है. नाउ you say that these are very safe investment products, they are backed by so many credit rating agencies. बहुत बड़े लोगों ने कहा है कि ये safe products हैं, आप ले लेते हो, right? So now as a customer you start buying such products and initially they give you good returns initially because housing market बहुत अच्छा कर रहा है, houses के price increase होते जाते हैं, right? And people also what they do is they are able to repay their loans because housing prices are rising. It makes sense to keep the home. But now after 2 years a reset triggers. अब reset में क्या हुआ, इन borrowers का interest rate भी अब बहुत बढ़ गया और इनको principal भी repay करना है. Now they can't repay, so they tell the bank, take the house, we can't repay. आप घर ले जाओ, घर के against ही तो loan था, take the house. So a lot of such borrowers default at the same time when the reset begins. When that happens, the bank takes the house. Now there are so many houses that have to be sold. There is an excess supply of houses in the market. Because of this excess supply, what happens? Houses का price गिर गया. Now even the remaining borrowers who were paying their EMIs, they realize it doesn't make sense to pay such a big EMI. इतना ज़्यादा तो हम इस पे installment दे रहे हैं, इसकी तो value भी नहीं है उतनी. So they also say ले जाओ घर, हम नहीं repay कर रहे, हम नहीं pay कर रहे. So ultimately defaults happen. All the customers they suffer, and by that time not just customers, very big funds had also invested in these products. Okay, ये जो combine करके आपने product बनाया है, right? So these were called mortgage securities, right? So इसमें बहुत सारे लोगों ने invest करा हुआ था, pension funds ने invest करा हुआ था, लोगों की pensions डूब गई, right? Mutual funds, social security, you name it. So globally investments हुई हुई थी इसमें, right? So that triggered the global financial crisis, right? And mind you, these products were insured also. So insurance companies had also said हम insure कर रहे हैं, अगर ये बैंक नहीं दे पाया हम दे देंगे. किसी ने भी नहीं दिया ultimately. Okay, so it was a very planned crime, the way I like to look at it. Okay, so millennials. So when I was in college when this happened, okay, and our teacher took an extra class to explain the subprime mortgage crisis to us, and it was very, very relevant at that time that you have to study this even for placements, you have to study this. So yeah, I am a millennial who is saying this to you, right? So why am I talking about this? Why did I spend so much time on this with you? Because there is a passage in CAT 2020 slot 3 that talks about the US recession in detail. पूरा passage ही US recession पर है, right? So that's why it is relevant for you, right? Okay. Now what was the aftermath? The aftermath of this crisis, see the pendulum. Classical said markets खुद correct कर लेंगी. उसके बाद कीन्स सेड ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता. फिर कीन्स फेल हो गया, सो एक नियो क्लासिकल रिसर्जेंस हुआ. अगेन वी सेड हम खुद देख लेंगे, गवर्नमेंट को ज़रूरत नहीं है. बट अब ये आइडिया दोबारा से फेल हो गया, एंड दिस टाइम इट फेल्ड बिग टाइम, राइट, आफ्टर द .com बबल एंड द US recession. So this was the end of the idea of self-correcting markets. Okay, it was the end. And there was a return of the government. इसके बाद बहुत सारी regulations enact हुई US में. I highly recommend this documentary Inside Job, which explains this in detail and in a very accessible language. अगर documentary नहीं देखनी, बड़ा थोड़ा सा interesting चीज़ चाहते हो, Batman को भी देखना चाहते हो, right? Watch this movie, The Big Short. Okay, so many regulations after that, and of course there was a massive fiscal stimulus. गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत ज़्यादा एक्सपेंडिचर किया, स्पेंडिंग, गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत ज़्यादा मनी स्पेंड करा सो एज टू बूस्ट द डिमांड इन द मार्केट, अदरवाइज रिसेशन से नहीं वापस आ पाते. एंड सम न्यू इकोनॉमिक अप्रोचेज इमर्ज्ड. So now there is no one economic approach that rules, like Keynesian, classical. Some new approaches emerged. In fact, they were also used to manage the COVID-triggered Great Recession. So COVID में अभी जब आई थी रिसेशन, उसको ग्रेट रिसेशन भी बोलते हैं, राइट. अर्लियर दैट टाइटल वॉज यूज फॉर द US रिसेशन, बट नाउ इट्स फॉर द कोविड ट्रिगर्ड ग्रेट रिसेशन. So these are the two new economic approaches: quantitative easing, modern monetary theory. Now it's your homework to find out about them in detail, but I will give you a quick introduction to these, because again quantitative easing is a word that you will encounter every now and then in newspapers and even in your RC passages. Have you encountered this? Tell me. All right, then let's very quickly understand that. So we have come from the 1900s now to 2000s, and in fact we are now talking about something that was used in COVID as well. So earlier conventional monetary policy क्या थी? Conventional monetary policy, what RBI also follows, what Federal Reserve also follows, that they used to increase or decrease the interest rate, है ना? This is what they used to do. This was their weapon of choice, and that then resulted in, if they increase the interest rate, money supply will reduce. If they decrease the interest rate to come out of a recession, the money supply in the economy will increase, because interest rate decrease करा मतलब कि बोरोवर्स के लिए ईजी हो गया मनी बोरो करना. सो मनी जो है इकोनॉमी में अब बोरोवर्स के हाथ में आ गया. नाउ दे विल स्पेंड इट. सो मनी सप्लाई, इसको बोलते हैं मार्केट में मनी सप्लाई इंक्रीज हो गई, इकोनॉमी में मनी सप्लाई इंक्रीज हो गई, राइट. सो दिस इज द कन्वेंशनल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. बट इमेजिन रिसेशन के टाइम पर क्या था? द इंटरेस्ट रेट्स वर ऑलरेडी वेरी वेरी लो, राइट. क्रेडिट वॉज वेरी वेरी चीप. दैट्स वाई देयर वॉज सो मच क्रेडिट इन द इकोनॉमी. So this did not work at that time. Just this would not work. When interest rates are already low, you can't go for a conventional policy. So you have to go for something unconventional. This is called an emergency policy. But अब ये emergency policy रही नहीं है, बहुत use होती है अब ये. Okay, unconventional. Yeah. So when interest rates are already low, create money. So what the Federal Reserve, the central bank does is it creates more money. US में तो डिजिटली भी चल जाता है ना. सो इन द US दे क्रिएटेड डिजिटली बिकॉज ऑलरेडी 90% ऑफ देयर इकोनॉमी ऑपरेट्स ऑन डिजिटल मनी. एंड व्हाट दे डू इज दे बाय गवर्नमेंट के बॉन्ड्स. बेसिकली गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड्स इशू करती है टू बोरो मनी फ्रॉम द पब्लिक. सो दे बाय दिस. दे इज द फेडरल रिजर्व. सो फेडरल रिजर्व बाइज दिस. सो व्हेन इट विल बाय दिस, इट विल गिव मनी टू द गवर्नमेंट. फिर गवर्नमेंट वो मनी स्पेंड कर देगी. सिमिलरली वो बैंक से भी ये जो सारी मॉर्गेज बैक्ड सिक्योरिटीज़ थी, MBS, ये उन्होंने खरीद ली. ठीक है, अब बैंक के पास भी मनी आ गया. नाउ बैंक विल बी एबल टू सर्कुलेट इट इन द इकोनॉमी. सो द मनी सप्लाई इंक्रीज्ड, राइट. यस, नाम की बस इमरजेंसी है अब ये. So this will, what it will do is it will reduce interest rates in the long run, and it will also boost money supply. However, because there is so much money in the economy now, there is a lot of money in the economy. So sometimes what happens is that there is too much money chasing too few goods, a lot of money chasing limited products available in the economy. So what it results in, जब products तो limited ही हैं, production limited हो रही है, right? But there is a lot of money with people, so too much money chasing too few goods, it can result in inflation. It can also result in income inequality. Okay, finally, when let's say, because who will be able to borrow now that there were regulations in the place? The rich are able to borrow more, they are able to earn more at this time. So income inequality भी हो जाती है because of this quantitative easing. The opposite of this is called quantitative tightening. So finally जब चीज़ें normal हो जाती हैं, तो जो इन्होंने इतना extra money inject करा होता है market में, धीरे धीरे they pull that money out. They also pull that money out very very gradually. This is called quantitative tightening. Okay, I hope you're not tired. Just the last slide. Okay, and I wanted to talk to you about all these things because economics RCs, you know, those that deal with broad economic philosophies like liberalism, those that talk about labor owner relationship, and these policies like quantitative easing, they are more common in your CAT, right? So it makes sense to talk about these theories. And this is the latest in the market, right? This became popular after the 2008 crisis, and a lot of its features, not the exact theory, but a lot of its features were implemented even after COVID, right? So COVID mein US was still relatively chill. Why? Because US is the reserve currency of the world, right? At least till now. So US can borrow in its own currency. Even if it is borrowing from other countries, it can borrow in its own currency. So it can't run out of money. Yeah. So the primary constraint on US government spending then is not debt, because it can't run out of money. वो हमेशा repay कर सकता है money तो print करके. The constraint that exists on government spending is inflation. Government को इतना भी नहीं spend करना economy में कि prices का कि products के prices ही rise हो जाए, goods के prices ही rise हो जाए. So the constraint is inflation, because inflation is very hard to rein. Inflation is bad for the economy, very high inflation, right? High inflation. So that is why, you know, the US was able to spend so much. The kind of fiscal stimulus that it released during COVID was in trillions of dollars, right? तो वो इतना कैसे spend कर पाया? क्योंकि US कभी भी अपना debt repay कर सकता है अपनी currency में. उसके लिए constraint बस ये है कि inflation नहीं होनी चाहिए, right? Taxes don't exist to finance government कि अरे government के पास revenue आ जाए फिर वो उससे spend करेगी. No, they don't exist to finance government spending. They exist to control inflation. So let's say government spending से inflation आ गई, so how do you control that inflation? You can go for quantitative easing. Sorry, you can go for quantitative tightening. या तो ये कर दो या फिर taxes increase कर दो government की side से, so that you are able to control inflation and also redistribute wealth, because rich को ज़्यादा tax करोगे, poor को कम tax करोगे, right? But all these come with their own you know, criticisms. This can result in inflation, inequality. This, while it may control inequality, it can also result in hyperinflation अगर government एक critical juncture पर रुके नहीं, right, to spend money. Yes, this is called MMT. Okay, so I know that things have gotten a bit technical, I understand that, but I really wanted, as I said, to discuss this with you because exam में आ सकता है. तो अगर exam में technical चीज़ आ सकती है, then we should know about it, right? So this was about the various economic theories and shifts in thinking. These are my recommendations to you. This is a book by Schiller, Robert Schiller, right? And this is a documentary, this is a movie. And yes, Too Big to Fail is also a documentary that you can watch. So this is where we started from, and I hope this is now clear to you what all we have talked about. Any queries? debt is, okay, debt is the principal that you have borrowed, the money that you have borrowed, right? Okay, so for example, if you come to me and you tell me, please give me rupees 50,000. So now you owe me rupees 50,000, this is your debt. But this debt, when you repay it to me, you will not just repay this principal amount. ये तो मेन कॉम्पोनेंट है, प्रिंसिपल तभी बोलते हैं इसको, मेन कॉम्पोनेंट है, बट यू विल ऑल्सो पे मी सम इंटरेस्ट ओवर एंड अबव. सो लेट्स से आई टेल यू दैट आई विल गिव इट टू यू ऑन 10% इंटरेस्ट रेट. सो नाउ यू हैव टू रीपे मी 50 plus 5, you have to repay me 55,000. So this is your debt. 55,000 is your total debt, right? Hyperinflation is excessive inflation overnight. See the case of Venezuela. There are beautiful short documentaries on it. There is a 13-minute documentary. Overnight बहुत ज़्यादा inflation हो जाती है, 90%, 95% inflation. Okay, so कल जो चीज़ let's say 1 rupee की थी, now let's say if there's a 100% inflation, what will happen? 100% inflation. So now it will cost you 2 rupees straight away. I think इसमें इतना difference नहीं दिख रहा है. Let's take 1,000 rupees. Okay. So now there is a 100% inflation. Now it will be of 2,000. Right. So that is hyperinflation. Okay. So this was it about economics and finance. Any questions that you have? Okay. So I hope it didn't get very technical. Okay, ठीक है, only CAT. I will probably invent such a gadget and then give it to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome everybody. See you in the next session, right? We have a heart to heart this week and we also have a session on Saturday. Okay, so I'll meet you on Saturday for VRC gym. We'll practice an RC together. Okay. Bye-bye. See you.